All right, I'm beginning our morning with a broad kind of introduction of what is our standing ground? What is our situation? Where do we start? And the first and really obvious place to begin is we are living in revolutionary times, truly revolutionary times in terms of human longevity. Just to throw a few figures on this, just a few numbers out of it. That's just a graph. You've seen a zillion graphs in your life. But if you'll note that in the United States, life expectancy at the beginning of the 20th century was 47. That wasn't so terribly long ago. 47. Now, you know how actuarial tables work, and that's factoring in childhood infant mortality, teenage stupidity, all those other things that affect the numbers. But that average life expectancy in the U.S. by the close of the century was pushing the high 70s. We do not yet have numbers into the current year, but certainly we're talking 80 plus now. Another way to think of it, the fastest growing age cohort in America today is persons over the age of 85. One kind of really pithy way to think of that is that every day in the United States, more people turn 85 than babies are born. Okay. And now the 100-plus-year-old group is really spiking in terms of their numbers as a proportion of the population. So some of us are old enough to remember when we were taught the old population pyramid in grammar school that had all these kids at the bottom, and at the very top was this tiny little triangle of persons over the age of 65. Well, that population triangle looks much more like a column now. So as we look at that in globally, just thinking globally in this diverse world, globally, people now 60 can expect to live another 19 years, globally. So we're including developing countries. We're including the very poor parts of the world in this mix, the whole planet. The average person who's made it to 60 can expect to live to 79. Persons of privilege, persons living in Western society with very high quality health care, nutrition, all the rest, what does that say about what we can expect at the age of 60? Obviously a good deal more than 19 years. By 2050, people over the age of 60 will account for 22% of the world's population. Again, extraordinary. That percentage will be higher in the US, in Europe, in other highly developed parts of the world. If we look at the US, these are like county things and all. I guess the only thing you really need to know here is when you see that dark blue, that means that anywhere between 20 and 43% of the population is now over the age of 65. And if we were to take these maps and project them through time with demographic projections, we get bluer and bluer and bluer. When we're presenting in our home state of Wisconsin, we do that and run through till 2035. And of course, aging is not distributed equally across the geography of the U.S. But if we look especially at the northern tier and other rural areas, the highest percentage of older persons are living in rural areas precisely where services, medical care, transportation are least available. Why? Because there are no jobs, and all the young adults have moved away in search of work. So, it's a revolution, and it's a huge challenge. One more, and then we're going to stop with the graphs and charts. Population 60 plus between 1900 and 2050. I'm not sure that these need a lot of explanation, but just that rapid acceleration of that top tier, the kind of pale grayish green, that's persons over the age of 85. And just look at how that population has grown and will continue to grow. And then the 75 to 84 also. So, we could show you lots more charts, but just the obvious thing, we're living in revolutionary times. Our understanding of later life needs to change in radical ways. Oops, hit the wrong button here. But as we look at that group that's over 85, let's say. Baby boomers aren't even there yet. You know, here comes 78 million of us, and as is always said, we are the pig in the python. You know, Susan initially made a slide of a real pig and a real python.
It's awful.
And decided that this early in the day, nobody wanted to look at a real pig and a real python, so she came up with the cartoon python with the pig. But as we have lived through this generation, you know, when we were just about here in the python, say in the 1950s, all kinds of new grammar schools were being built. You couldn't build them fast enough. And pretty much every church in America built a new church school wing, handling all these kids coming through. Well, here we are now, somewhere between late middle age and early old age. Susan and I are what are called leading edge baby boomers. I'm 65, she's almost there, right? So we're moving into, of course we've changed all the definitions. If you look at old books on demographics, middle age used to begin around age 40 in the books and charts. And old age began somewhere around the age of 60. So we've had to come up with an entire new language. It's like we live in a society where everyone is middle class, right? You know, people earning $500,000 a year say, well, I'm doing pretty well for middle class. And people who are making $40,000 a year do not want to think of themselves. So middle class is almost everybody. Now we're moving to the point where middle age is almost everybody. Am I at 65 middle age, or am I old age? How do I think about myself? How does society think about me? And Susan, the gerontologist, can point out that we now have multiple categories within old age, right? We have, what is it, early?
We have, yeah,
young old. You can be young old. So young old. And then we have
old, and then we have old.
Old. Yeah, 85 gets you to old, right?
And then oldest old. I mean, it's silly.
Yeah. And as longevity increases and as vitality remains stronger, that old begins at 85. I could predict at some point old will begin at 90. Okay, we keep changing the categories, and yet we still have this hunger for meaning and involvement and relationship in our life. So as this pig moves further towards the tail, what are we going to need to build more of? Not grammar schools, not church school wings.
Senior facilities.
Of various kinds. As we keep experimenting with different models of what it means to be moving into the young old stage, you know, a lot of phenomena of the, say, 1980s are playing out and ending. The whole movement to adult leisure villages, where, okay, this is not the slides, and I'll get through my stuff on time, but Susan and I have done some writing on how concepts of retirement are changing in our time. That for many people, we argue retirement will be less a singular event than a sequence of transitions over time. Because we used to have just two models of retirement. One, it's me time. I'm spending my children's inheritance. I've worked hard, now I'm just going to play. And that was a pretty cool model when at 65 you had a life expectancy of 4 years. Play a few rounds of golf, bounce the grandchildren on your knees, don't spend up too much of your pension, then politely drop over dead. That's changed. That's changing rapidly. So the whole leisure village in Florida or Arizona was, I'm going to go off to be with people just like us, and we're going to do all these fun things and sleep with each other's spouses, and it will be like junior high without the algebra. And those folks are migrating back. It's reverse migration because they never bargained for frailty, cognitive or physical. And suddenly this leisure life, far from family and roots, doesn't look so good. Of course, the other model of retirement that's bankrupt is you ask the new retiree, how you enjoying retirement? Oh, I'm busier than ever. Well, then you're messing up. You're doing it wrong. It should be about finding new balances and priorities and new sources of meaning. But, you know, here we go, towards the tail. All right, so longevity revolution, we're getting dramatically older. What's the most well-documented risk factor for Alzheimer's and other dementia? Age. Right. So, some people talk about this as apocalyptic demography, all this horrible language. This one makes my dear wife crazy. This was actually a term was used in the New England Journal of Medicine, which should know better. Tsunamis are bad things. They kill people, they destroy. And to talk about folks growing older as a silver tsunami, that's language of fear and dread and blame and judgment. And we're getting real fussy about language. That we're going to bankrupt society, right? Absolutely no economic evidence of that, actually, but it's just, here come these old dependent people using up the resources. And then, boy, do we quarrel with this one. Epidemic of dementia. You've seen it, right? Many, many times. Academics are usually, that language is usually used for things that are contagious, right? Mm-hmm. Epidemic of flu, epidemic of this or that. Is dementia an epidemic? It is the growing number of persons who will be diagnosed with some form of dementia is simply a product of living longer and our ability to control, cure other forms of illness, particularly infectious illnesses, that meant that most of us did not live long enough to have to deal with the reality of dementia. It is not an epidemic. So what are we going to do about this growing number of older people and the greater number of folks who will be journeying into some form of dementia or be caring for someone who is on that journey? Well, option A. It's option A, right? And it's a very popular option. But let's just look at what we're talking about here. What is dementia? A progressive impairment in memory, cognition, and the ability to reason. Keyword, progressive, right? If it is a true dementia, and sort of there are other things that cause confusion and short-term memory, some of which are treatable, some of which can be made stable, but if it's a true dementia, it is a progressive condition. So, just to look at our kind of standing ground now, and we're using really conservative numbers here, the most conservative we could find. We've adjusted this slide so many times. So, we've already covered the first part. At age 65, 1 person in 9, it could be 1 person in 6, depends upon which study you look at, already has Alzheimer's disease. That is, the changes are happening in the brain that will lead to symptoms usually many years later. We heard a researcher from England when we were at Alzheimer's Europe in Vienna last year who was talking about, and we're not about pharmacology today or the research on upstream interventions. It's important work, but I think we know enough to say that by God's grace, that research may benefit, if not our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, by slowing the course of the disease with early diagnosis. But it ain't going to happen anytime soon. But he noted that as we get more sophisticated in pre-symptomatic diagnosis, whether it's through taking spinal taps and finding the biomarkers in there, whether it's through advanced PET scans or whatever, we will finally start to see Alzheimer's disease for what it is, a disease not of old age, but a disease of middle age, whose symptoms may not appear until later in life. And won't that be a shift in societal perception when we understand it's a disease that for most people begins in their 50s or 60s. So at age 65, conservatively, more than 1 in 10 of us already has those changes going on. Very firm number here. By age 72, 1 person in 3 has experienced cognitive decline. Meaning if you did the standard battery of tests, 1 person in 3, it may or may not be dementia, but would test, quote, not normal for the age group. Now, of course, if 1 person in 3 is not normal for the age group, you can raise questions about the word normal, right? Because we now know that in terms of healthy brain aging, cognitive loss can be measured across the board as young as between 45 and 50. Our brains are changing as the rest of us is changing. And again, a very conservative number here. We used to put up 50%, but we're okay. We'll back off to the most conservative number. Up to 40% of all persons will have some form of dementia to some degree. Remembering those numbers? How many people? All these people turning 85? Conservatively, 40% with some dementia to some degree. Not necessarily severe, not necessarily incapacitating, but there will be changes, and there will have to be accommodations and adjustment aids. Then you add this little piece here, critical shortage of geriatricians and geriatric psychiatrists, for obvious reasons. In the US, you graduate from medical school with a huge debt. We're very different from most other societies in that regard, right? And so you got to earn an income to pay off your debt and have the lifestyle to which you'd like to become accomplished. If you go into geriatric medicine, where are your compensations going to come from? Medicare, Medicaid. How do you pay off your debt? So as we say, the smart young medical school graduates go into orthopedic surgery to fix aging baby boomers' knees so they can keep playing tennis, rather than learning how to care for the whole aging baby boomer. It's even worse with geriatric psychiatry. Our region of Wisconsin lost its only 2 geriatric psychiatrists 6 years ago now, and there's nobody to replace them. And that means, among other things, in our corner of the state, we'll get to this afternoon, even if your primary care physician, doing what they are required to do by Medicare, does a little cognitive screening in your yearly wellness visit, and it indicates that you should go for a full assessment. The waiting time for an assessment in our region is 7 to 8 months. Try to imagine hearing these scary words from your doctor, I think you really have an evaluation, a cognitive evaluation. Then you spend 7 or 8 months in limbo, because there aren't people out there to do those assessments. So, and then the few potentially effective medications on the near horizon. Again, that's not really our topic today. If people are interested, we can tell you a whole lot about failed clinical trials, and the whole movement towards now is early diagnosis and finding some agent to intervene and slow the progression. As one Polish researcher said, if we can slow the progression enough that the symptoms do not appear until sometime in your mid-90s, we can probably live with that. And that's a long way off, a long way off. So that's where we are. The course of dementia, we already mentioned the changes in the brain start 15, 20, maybe longer before symptoms appear. Finally, there are unmistakable symptoms. I don't have to give you a 101 on those. Repeating stories, getting lost, trouble with checkbooks, on and on it goes, till after a suitable period of denial by the person, by those who care for the person, there's an acknowledgement that the symptoms are real and should be addressed. The average, by the way, worldwide, only 1 person in 3 with dementia ever gets diagnosed at all, worldwide. And of those who are diagnosed, typically it is 2 years after those symptoms, unmistakable symptoms, have appeared. 2 years during which lots of important things could have been happening. You know, beginning with planning, but also lifestyle changes that we have every reason to believe, A, will improve the quality of life and have some potential in some persons to slow the progression of the disease. The diet, exercise, social interaction, spiritual practices, these things matter, but if we're in denial or undiagnosed, they're unlikely to happen. Alzheimer's disease and some other forms of dementia, of course, are terminal illnesses. If you don't die of anything else, as most people do, they will ultimately take your life. But then what happens during this period that could be 8 years, could be a lot longer? What happens to make life rich and joyous and to still have meaning for you and for those who love you? These are the questions we are trying to raise in terms of, we think that the only 2 effective things we have to address the reality of dementia in the absence of, the Americans, we have such a naive belief that anything that scares us, medical science would just say, here's the pill, take that, you'll be fine. Not going to happen. That leaves us with friendship, community, kindness, patience, and reconfiguring our cultural institutions, our communities, to include and value people making this journey and their care partners. So anyway, in the absence of any answer, fear is the dominant message. And now we need to say, we love the Alzheimer's Association. We work very, very closely with our local chapter, with our state organization, and these wonderful people who are offering resources and care and support. We have some huge issues with the national organization and the kinds of language and materials it uses primarily in its fundraising for research. And some of you may know that the national organization has done a radical shift in recent years in terms of its financial priorities, moving away from direct support and services for people with the diagnosis and their care partners to money for research. And I won't say more about that, but I will run you through one of their more recent publications. Generation Alzheimer's, the defining disease of the baby boomers. Yeah, got your attention? Okay? Here's just some of the language in this booklet. By the way, to get this booklet, you go to the Alzheimer's Association website. You can't download it. You send in a request to have them send it to you as a PDF, and to get it, you provide your email address, your mailing address. What do you think the chances are you might get some fundraising material? Okay? Devastating, deteriorating, debilitating, and heartbreaking. Well, yeah, we're not Pollyannas. We know that Alzheimer's disease and other dementias can be and will be all of these things. But is that the entire story? It means the loss of anything and everything you have ever known. Now, I'm hearing there are some Christian people in the room. Can Christians, Jews, anyone of faith, begin to accept that anything, any condition, any disease can take away anything and everything from us? I mean, it takes everything away from you. It takes away the love of God. It takes away the love of family. It takes away your capacity to share in relationships of joy and meaning. Can it really do that? This booklet claims it can. Okay, here's the worst. It robs people of all bodily functions. I mean, that's only true if you go into end stage with it, right? And eventually, okay, here's where we get angry, their humanity. No. No, I mean, that is horrible, horrible lie, and a very damaging lie. But it's the kind of material that's out there feeding the fear, feeding the fear. So here's another ad from the Alzheimer's Association. We'd show an Alzheimer's survivor here, if there were one. And you can't really read small print. 0% survival. Excuse me. We have a condition called life, which also has a 0% survival. 6% the funding of cancer. That's a legitimate issue to raise, right? And we do need to fund more research. And we need to do that unselfishly because it's not going to benefit us. Okay? Not the research that matters. And then what really makes my psychologist wife crazy, 100% insane.
Oh.
Now, the use of the word insane. Let's talk about stigmatizing some folks in our culture by throwing that word out there to damage and stigmatize the mentally ill in our society, right? So we have huge issues with that. The last kind of gripey one we'll show you. This is hard to see in this slide. But the idea, it's a 3-generation family, right? And see Grandma, can you note that she's transparent? She's fading away. She's fading away. She's no longer completely there. But then you look at the same picture. See the baby? The baby sees her. The baby sees her. She sees the baby. Is that not a look of joy and love on her face? She is not fading away. She's experiencing cognitive change. It's not disappearing. So we just have extraordinary issues with that. So that's the message out there. It's a message of fear. And what are the implications for individuals? I'd ask you, what does that do to individuals when you just see this fear being touted everywhere about dementia? Just comments?
Why not give up?
Yeah. Call Dr. Kevorkian. That happened to me, just kill me, right? Right? Just, And individuals in terms of, it teaches us that our friend with Alzheimer's is no longer there. So therefore, there is no point in my continuing the friendship. We come up with those horrible lines that, oh, I don't go to see him anymore because he's just an empty shell. I want to remember him the way, those horrible things, because fading away, gone. And our fear of contagion too, identity contagion. And what are the implications for communities? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's, I think, a huge suicide situation that goes on that's never talked about. But I obviously see it a lot. So I mean, and because of all these things you're describing.
Yeah,
You know, these people
because
don't
it
know.
makes it impossible to imagine a good, rich life filled with
Right.
meaning within the reality of these changes.
Right.
So we need to tell a new story. And for communities, obvious implication is, since these people are fading away, they don't belong in community anymore. And we isolate folks with dementia, and we isolate their care partners. Now, we noted that the single strongest risk factor for dementia is age. The second is isolation. So what do we do with people with dementia? Isolate them. I like to point out that I'm old enough to remember when children born with congenital disabilities were routinely taken away from their parents, became wards of the state, and disappeared. And the assumption was the parents were not equipped to meet their needs. Two, that they were better off with their own kind, meaning in an institution somewhere far off. And then hidden with that was that, well, they might be disturbing to the other children. And now we look back and say how barbaric. And see how our lives and our communities are enriched by the full inclusion of people with disabilities. Well, we're still doing it to people with dementia. And we need to find ways to accommodate this disability, even as we have accommodated others. So the fear, here's the fear: old age in an institution. And the old images of institution, remember the steam pipes sitting on a wall and packed 4 to a room and pumped full of medications and Nurse Ratched and all the rest of it. And the fear of losing one's mind, being reduced to a subhuman state. The dream, active aging in place and compressed morbidity. I'm going to be the one who dodges all this. I'll stay in my own home, my own community. I'll have a lovely apartment. I'll do this or that. And on my 98th birthday, I'm going to get up and I'm going to play tennis. I'm going to finish writing my novel in the afternoon, have dinner with my best friends, make vigorous love to my partner, and then in the morning I'll wake up dead. That's compressed morbidity. Almost nobody gets it, right? So that's a dream. Never having to go through frailty or decline, and then just having this quick death. Of course, the truth is we're living longer and we're dying longer. That's the reality. The nightmare is not aging in place, but being stuck. Just being stuck in place. Confused, forgetful, alone. That fear of just abandonment. And it's not an unrealistic fear in a society that stigmatizes age in general and dementia in particular. So here's a new story we're going to be telling all day. Aging with joy and dignity in community, with dementia accepted as a disability that, like all other disabilities, can be accommodated.